Yeah, I will now share my screen. You can see that, right? Okay. Slides. Okay, from start. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the moderator and the other presenters. Also, shout out to Wahyu from Indonesia, who has brilliantly covered the causes and solutions and in analyzing the crisis. So I will not be saying anything different from what he will be saying, but only perhaps from a Malaysia perspective from Malaysia, because as you know, the fires do not occur here, that they come from Indonesia, but we have been suffering this from the haze for some 30, 40 years, depending on when you start counting. Okay, so the title of my presentation is Hazed and Confused, the political economy of the Indonesian transboundary haze in Southeast Asia. Why? Because we have been hazed in Malaysia and we are confused in Malaysia over like what is the cause of the crisis. Yeah, but just to give the just to acknowledge the source of my title is actually from a Spotify playlist that was made during one of, I think this was made in 2019. I think it was one of the 2019 or was it 2018? One of 2019, one of the worst incidents. So yeah, this was one of the ways of urban people to cope. So they made a playlist. Okay, now how I will start. Okay, first, from our side, we need there is an urgent need to frame the issue correctly in Malaysia, an accurate understanding at an international and national policy level on the political economy of the Indonesian transboundary haze. So the history, the political history and development of the crisis must be fully understood if you wish to resolve the problem. The problem is that from our perspective, from our analysis, is that the issue is not framed correctly. The parties responsible are blamed, the wrong people, the wrong factors are always blamed. If we are to answer all these four questions, yeah, which ends with how are we going to find hope? How are we going to resolve it? Okay, so now I would like to stress in my presentation 4 questions, and it's all about history and time. We here in Malaysia always ask when the haze arrives again. We will ask who's responsible? Why are they not punished? Is it the local farmers? Is it the corporations from Malaysia, or what, that sort of thing? But if you were to look at all the body of questions being asked, in principle, the questions that we ask is related to history. Why? Because the crisis has been going on for 30, 40 years, depending on when you start counting. Yeah. So essentially, the question would be this: one, why do the fires continue for more than 3 decades? Or 4 decades? 2, how could the fires be allowed to rage so wildly and for so long? I mean, that kind of smoke that can reach in the Philippines and even Thailand, yeah, it's so huge. You cannot imagine how much the local communities in Indonesia themselves suffer. And third, what policy and legal efforts have been undertaken to resolve the crisis in all these years? So we've got general questions asked by the public, but if you try to structure it, you will find that they're essentially asking these 3 questions, or maybe more, but these are the 3 that we have identified. Okay, now there is this fiction, there are many fictions, many myths going about the cause of the crisis. So I'll try to simplify it. First, one of the common narrative is that the narrative, the spark and fire. You know, there's no smoke without fire, but there's no fire without spark, right? So I'm trying to simplify it here. Now, the use of fire in agricultural activities in Kalimantan and Sumatra in Indonesia are said to be the sparks that light the fire. And then you have the El Nino phenomenon, a cycle, a climate cycle that is said as to be as a catalyst that uncovers the tinder, the fuel primarily made of peat and dry vegetative matter, forests and peat land included, which keeps the fires burning for a long period of time. We can understand that sometimes fires may occur, but my God, why couldn't you stop it? And my God, why are they so big? Yeah. Now, so but
Shamila,
well, this,
sorry.
yeah.
Sorry, when we're talking about spark and fire, can I just talk about the wind? Because I think the audience can hear the wind noise from the fan. Probably it's blowing onto your mic.
Okay, and I will stop. That's all I was asking. Sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you, Shamila.
Okay, I hope there is no wind now. Yes, and the wind also, yes, and the wind does blow from Indonesia up to Peninsula Malaysia. That's correct too. So that's the other, but we can't do anything about the wind. Yeah. Now, anyway, back to the presentation. While this understanding is certainly correct, the perception that they are the underlying causes to the crisis is not. Yeah. Okay, now here's the argument. Without sufficient amount of spark, the tinder would have remained ineffective. Without a lot of tinder, any spark would have been relatively controllable. So therefore, we need to go to history before even the spark meeting first tinder. Yeah. Now the meeting of the spark and we from our understanding and study, we have found that the meeting of the spark and tinder is actually the result of specific economic and political decisions grounded in poor governance in Indonesia, closely tied to the international trade of agro-commodities that is fueled by our capitalist economic system. So we must identify what is the underlying cause and what is just, you know, a physical cause, the spark and the fire. Yeah. Okay. Now, the clarity of history. There are two principal historical facts that cannot be denied. Number one, this transboundary haze crisis is new. There is the newness of the crisis, but the long tradition of using fire in, let's say, shifting agriculture or local agricultural activities. So, which means that we've always had the spark. Yeah, people have used fire. But then, so the end question now, why was there no copious amount of tinder? So this is how I wish that people can frame the problem. Now, in the past, indigenous and local farmers in Kalimantan, Sumatra, even in Borneo, even in Southeast Asia, we've always used traditionally, you know, you use a little bit of fire to clear and to cultivate. But this rarely did result in large wildfires, so the existence of transboundary haze was practically impossible. Historically, yes, fires, vegetative fires, that's the correct term. I understand, as I understand it in English, they have been recorded to occur in Kalimantan and Sumatra. You can search for the history and you will find them. But their incidence was extremely low, limited to a handful of rare events in the course of a century, only during unusually intense drought periods. Now, when they did occur, they were largely a local event and did not rage as wildly as they do today. In fact, this term transboundary haze did not exist, virtually unknown prior to the 1990s in the absence of the experience. Now, we are all, most of us working today who are adults, we were born in the 70s to 80s, 60s, depending on your age, yeah? But if you remember, we didn't have this. We never did have this, yeah, for a lot of, you know, starting in the 80s, it was from my memory, so my age, I remembered it clearly in the late 1990s. That's when the first they arrived. Before that, we didn't. I did not grow up like regularly every year facing the haze. So now, back then, we have to look at some of the most classical or most basic studies we've done we've researched for them, and if you were to look at history, the first in living memory, which means while I am still alive, but yes, it is true that the first one, it was in 1982 and 1983. Around that time, if you remember, we were children. Most of us were children at that time. Some of you may not have been born. This was in East Kalimantan. This was the first one that was like very, very, terrible, that it was reported on all national in the neighboring countries. Yeah. Now, this was the first instance that did happen. And then following this, a study was done by the, a team of German and Indonesian foresters. This is the title of the study. It is part of a long series of studies. This is just one paper. And these are some of the and these are some of the findings. For the lowland forest, for the burnt area, 11% of undisturbed forest was burnt. 75% of forest had been disturbed of forest that had been disturbed was burned. 75% versus 11. And out of the 75, these are the division, yeah? Lightly disturbed or what. But the point is here, 75 versus 11. For peat and freshwater swamp forest, 70% of undisturbed forest was burned, and 97% of disturbed forest was burned. But here's the interesting one. Only 1% of the study area had been converted into plantations during this time, about 27 hectares. But 90% or 26,000 hectares of these areas were actually burnt. So this was at the beginning of the advancement of plantations in Kalimantan. And then 85% of shifting agricultural land was indeed burned, but this was actually relatively small. So these were the facts of one of the most important studies that was done following. But were the lessons learned? No, they were studied, but the authorities, I presume, did not study. Then again, in 1997, this was personally what I personally remember, since I was a young person at this time. I'm still young. This was during an El Nino year, yeah. So this was is larger, 8.3 million hectares. And then again, another study was done, but what happens after this? Yeah. So later, many other researchers, CSOs, have continued to study and report on the crisis. Gellert, this is one important study that shows that the findings from such studies, the previous one that I've mentioned, did not result in effective policy change. And they could have been successful in preventing the repeat of the event. Although there had been a severe drought in Kalimantan and Sabah during the incidents, it was actually political economy of the resource extraction in Indonesia that was to be blamed for this failure. So these are the names Mia Siscawati, Halina Varki, and also Indonesian CSOs. We have a lot of resources that have pointed out to how to solve the problem. We also have, these are, sorry, I'm coughing. These are some of the examples of foreign and international instruments that perhaps we should look at from a foreigner's perspective in order to address the situation. There is the ASEAN Agreement on Transboundary Haze Pollution. Singapore has one. There is an interesting law from France, French Corporate Duty of Vigilance of Law, that could be of use to address some of the problems from our side. because we know, yes, there are Malaysian companies with Malaysian interests and foreign interests operating in Indonesia. But the comment on ASEAN agreement on transboundary haze pollution is that it simply is not good enough. Yeah, it's just it's weak. So conclusions. Now, it is much more urgent to ensure that there are optimal governance and legal conditions in Indonesia to end the prolonged forest and pit fires and transboundary haze. You can have conviction of the companies, but a conviction would mean that the crime has already taken place, forest has been lost, and destruction has been done. So while it's good to prevent but once we have successfully charged and convicted, it's actually a little bit too late as far as the ecosystem is concerned. Yeah, the corporation has no nationality, but its alleged crime has a location. It's more efficient to charge a corporation in the country where a crime has been committed. While number 4, while there may be opportunity to develop legal instruments to hold transnational corporations accountable in their country of origin in a court of law, I believe Mr. Q is also working on this. The main challenge lies in the accessibility to and presentation of evidence during court proceedings. And also, existence of a law does not guarantee successful convictions. Yeah, that can only increase if the crime is tried where the crime has taken place. And number 6, without optimal governance and legal conditions, corporations, whether Indonesian or foreign, may continue to break the law. Okay, so now in conclusion, I'm finishing already. These are clarity of verbs. Okay, number 1, the crisis is not caused by smallholders or local farmers, and a corporation is not a farmer. We must accept this fact. Number 2, the crisis is caused by the unsustainable and unsafe expansion of large monocultures for the production of agro-commodities on formerly forested and peatland areas, chiefly for the cultivation of oil palm and pulp and paper sectors. Understanding the process, the capitalist process of overexploiting natural resources and the transfer of risk and impacts to the public sector and communities in the international agro-commodity sector. This crisis then is exacerbated by the El Nino phenomenon, and the crisis is sustained by poor governance in Indonesia. And the crisis, therefore, can be resolved by recognizing all of the above factors. So these are the simplification of verbs for us. I think that is very important for us to understand, like who is actually at fault and what do we do, okay? So the clarity of solution is the reason for this is the advancement of the unsustainable and unsafe expansion of certain agricultural sector in Indonesia in the last 40 years. The failure to keep large swaths of forested and peatland sufficiently moist, as how it should be in the wet tropics, to the point where their flammability could remain low even during harsh ENSO periods. So we must understand it's very difficult for wet tropical islands like Kalimantan and Sumatra to actually produce long-lasting and large vegetative fires capable of producing smoke to traverse national boundaries on a predictably regular basis. There is nothing natural about what is happening now. So in order to find the solution, these are the 3. It's quite simple, really. First, you implement the correct policies and laws that protect forests, peatland, the rights of peoples and communities, indigenous peoples, and promote sustainable agriculture. As you can see, Wahyu's presentation has already shown that they are going in the opposite way. Yeah. Second, ending the financing of the expansion itself. And third is you must also look to about the fulfillment of international commitments to protect biodiversity and address climate change. So the solutions technically is really quite simple. Is whether the actors implied would like to do it or not. Thank you.